Some locomotives were not just retired, they were banned, prohibited, or withdrawn so decisively that railroads pretended they never existed. From designs so dangerous they killed their own crews, to experimental machines that spent more time in repair shops than on rails, these are 15 locomotives that earned permanent exile from the world's railways. Number 15, the camelback locomotive. By 1877, railroad engineers in the northeastern United States had a problem. Anthracite coal waste called culm was dirt cheap, but it needed enormous fireboxes to burn properly. The Wooten firebox was so wide, it could not fit where cabs normally sat. So designers did something insane. They perched the engineer's cab on top of the boiler, straddling the machinery like a rider on a horse. The fireman remained alone on a tiny exposed platform at the rear, separated from the engineer by tons of roaring steel. Communication was reduced to shouting or banging on the boiler with a wrench. Heat from the firebox directly beneath made summer runs unbearable. If anything went wrong, the engineer sat directly above the chaos. Injury records tell a grim story. Camelback crews suffered twice the accident rate of conventional engines. Engineers were scalded, thrown from their perches, and occasionally killed when boilers failed beneath them. The Interstate Commerce Commission had seen enough. In 1927, they banned new camelback construction outright, citing unacceptable risk. Existing camelbacks limped on for years, but the design was officially dead. A few survivors sit in museums today, monuments to when saving money on fuel meant putting engineers in harm's way. Number 14, the British Railways steam ban of 1968. On August 12, 1968, British Railways did something unprecedented. They banned every single steam locomotive from their standard gauge network. Not gradually, phased out. Banned. The decision came one day after the famous 15 Guinea Special completed its final run from Liverpool to Carlisle, marking the official end of steam on Britain's main lines. The ban was absolute, with exactly one exception. Flying Scotsman escaped prohibition because owner Alan Pegler had secured a special clause in his purchase contract. When the Scotsman left for America in 1969, the ban became complete. The prohibition was lifted in 1971, but the circumstances reflected how eager British Railways was to bury its steam heritage. The push for modernization had been building since the 1955 Modernization Plan, which promised a diesel and electric future. By 1968, maintaining steam infrastructure had become an embarrassment. Coaling stations, water towers, and the thousands of skilled workers required represented costs that diesel and electric traction eliminated. The final years saw steam concentrated in a shrinking pocket. The last 307 locomotives operated mainly on the Midland region. Black 5s and Steiner 8Fs worked until August 1968, then faced immediate withdrawal. The ban was not about safety. It was about erasing an entire era overnight. Number 13, Pennsylvania Railroad Class T1 Duplex. The Pennsylvania Railroad's T1 class should have been the future of American steam. Introduced in 1942 with 2 prototypes and followed by 50 production units between 1945 and 1946, these 4 duplex drive locomotives were fast, powerful, and stunningly streamlined by Raymond Loewy. They were also dangerously unpredictable. The T1's fatal flaw was wheel slip so violent it could occur at 100 miles per hour. Unlike conventional locomotives where all driving wheels shared adhesion, the T1's duplex design split power between 2 independent engine sets. When one set lost grip, sudden unloading could trigger catastrophic slippage that damaged the sophisticated poppet valve gear. Engineers transitioning from reliable K4 Pacifics struggled with the T1's sensitive throttle. Where the K4s forgave heavy-handed operation, the T1 punished it instantly. By 1948, the Pennsylvania Railroad made a decisive choice. Diesel locomotives would power all express passenger trains. The brand new T1 fleet was downgraded to secondary services. All were out of service by 1952 and scrapped between 1951 and 1956. 52 revolutionary locomotives, retired after barely 5 years. The T1 proved that raw speed meant nothing if you could not trust your locomotive to stay on the rails. Number 12, Chesapeake and Ohio, Class Mummel 1, steam turbine. In 1947, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway unveiled what they hoped would be steam's answer to the diesel revolution. The Class M1 looked like nothing else on rails, a streamlined behemoth with the cab in the center, a coal bunker ahead, and a backwards-mounted boiler behind. 3 were built by Baldwin and Westinghouse at enormous expense. They were intended to pull the railroad's planned luxury streamliner, the Chessie. The M1s were engineering nightmares from day one. They generated electricity from a coal-fired boiler spinning a turbine, which then powered traction motors. This hybrid approach combined the worst problems of both technologies. Coal dust and ash found their way into the delicate turbines and electrical equipment. Traction motors overheated, generators ran hot. Maintenance crews opened access panels to find machinery coated in abrasive residue. The M1s were designed for a 100 miles per hour route from Washington to Cincinnati, but could not complete the journey without failure. The promised Chessie streamliner never entered service. By 1949, all 3 sat on the deadline, too troublesome to justify repairs. They were scrapped in 1950, earning the nickname Sacred Cow. Total service life was roughly 3 years of mostly unsuccessful operation. Number 11, Norfolk and Western 2300 John Henry. The Norfolk and Western Railway was the last great holdout against dieselization. Well into the 1950s, this railroad built its own steam locomotives across coal-rich territory where fuel was practically free. In 1954, the railroad experimented with steam turbine technology and built the longest steam locomotive ever constructed. At 161 feet from pilot to tender, the John Henry was a coal-fired steam turbine electric monster. Named after the legendary steel-driving man John Henry, the 2300 was supposed to prove that steam could compete. It couldn't. The John Henry used a Babcock and Wilcox water tube boiler operating at 600 pounds per square inch, twice the pressure of conventional locomotives. Automatic controls regulated the complex boiler, but they proved temperamental. Coal dust infiltrated the electrical machinery. At 818,000 pounds, the locomotive could not fit on any Norfolk and Western turntable. The controls were like an airplane cockpit, and they were unusually complex, taking engineers far longer to learn than conventional equipment. Starting tractive effort of 175,000 pounds was impressive, but above 12 miles per hour, the railroad's own Class A steamers outperformed it. By 1957, the 2300 had been restricted to helper service. On January 4, 1958, it was stricken from the roster. The legend of John Henry ended the same way the original story did. Number 10, the Erie Railroad Triplex, 28882. In 1914, Baldwin Locomotive Works engineer George Henderson designed the most powerful steam locomotive ever attempted. The triplex was essentially 3 engines sharing one boiler, with 24 driving wheels clawing at the rails under a single engineer's command. The Erie Railroad's first triplex, number 2603, was named Matt H. Shea. Baldwin claimed it could pull 650 freight cars in a train nearly 5 miles long. The reality was considerably less impressive. The triplex's fundamental problem was simple physics. Even its enormous boiler could not generate enough steam to feed 6 hungry cylinders at any reasonable speed. Above 10 miles per hour, steam pressure collapsed. The Virginian Railway's even more ambitious 28884 version could barely sustain 5 miles per hour. Crews said the best place to cool off on a hot summer day was standing behind the fire door, because the engine consumed steam so voraciously that the firebox ran cold. The rear engine set mounted under the tender created another fatal flaw. As coal and water were consumed, the tender got lighter, reducing adhesion. The locomotive's tractive effort literally decreased as it worked. The Erie operated 3 triplexes as helpers until the late 1920s. All were scrapped by 1933. No triplex survived. Number 9, the Pennsylvania Railroad Class S2 steam turbine. In 1944, the Pennsylvania Railroad took delivery of the only 686 steam locomotive ever built. The S2, number 6200, was a bold experiment in direct drive steam turbine technology, with a massive turbine geared directly to the driving wheels instead of generating electricity. At high speed, the S2 was magnificent. During test runs in March 1945, it reached 110 miles per hour, hauling a 17-car train. British locomotive engineer E.S. Cox rode the footplate and reported maintaining 100 miles per hour for 12 consecutive minutes. The turbine drive was smoother than any piston locomotive, putting far less stress on the track. The problem was everything else. Below 40 miles per hour, the S2 consumed steam and coal at catastrophic rates. Turbines thrive on constant high-speed operation, but railroading demands constant starting, stopping, and crawling through yards. Every time the S2 slowed down, its efficiency plummeted. The boiler was a standard fire tube design with no modifications for the turbine's voracious steam appetite. The S2 spent its brief career hauling premier passenger trains like the Broadway Limited. In August 1949, severe turbine damage ended its operational life. After 103,000 miles, number 6200 was stored, then scrapped. In 1952, no further S2 locomotives were built. Number 8, LNER Class W1, Hush Hush. When the London and Northeastern Railway unveiled locomotive number 10,000 in 1929, the secrecy surrounding its development earned it the nickname Hush Hush. Designer Nigel Gresley borrowed water tube boiler technology from naval vessels, hoping higher steam pressures would deliver unprecedented efficiency. The locomotive looked like nothing else on British rails, with a bulging boiler casing that earned another nickname, Galloping Sausage. The water tube boiler operated at 450 pounds per square inch, compared to 180 pounds per square inch for contemporary Gresley A1 Pacific locomotives. On paper, this promised dramatic improvements in the thermal efficiency. In practice, the complexity was overwhelming. Test runs revealed poor steaming despite numerous modifications to the exhaust system. Air leakage into the casing proved impossible to eliminate. Heavy forgings for the main drums came from a Sheffield shipyard. The boiler was built in Glasgow by Yarrow and Company, marine specialists who had never constructed a railway locomotive. Plans to name the engine British Enterprise were quietly dropped when performance fell short. By 1936, with no further progress possible, the W1 was rebuilt with a conventional boiler. It ran in this modified form until 1959, when it was withdrawn and scrapped. The high-pressure experiment had lasted barely 7 years. Number 7, Pennsylvania Railroad Class S1, the big engine. The S1 locomotive number 6100 was the longest rigid-frame passenger steam locomotive ever built. At 140 feet from pilot to tender, it was so enormous that getting it to the 1939 New York World's Fair required a special route over Long Island Railroad tracks. Obstacles had to be removed along the way. Raymond Loewy's streamlined Art Deco shell made it look like a missile on rails. But the S1 was too big for its own good. Its 644 six-wheel arrangement was unique in railroad history, with 2 sets of driving wheels powered by separate cylinder groups. Unlike articulated locomotives that could flex through curves, the S1's entire driven wheelbase was rigid. This made it unable to negotiate curves on most of the Pennsylvania Railroad's own system. The S1 was restricted to the relatively straight 283-mile run between Chicago and Crestline, Ohio. Even there, it suffered from the same wheel slip problems that plagued its T1 successors. The massive machine reportedly reached speeds exceeding 130 miles per hour during tests. Crews loved its smooth ride, but limitations confined number 6100 to a single locomotive class. Pennsylvania Railroad scrapped it in 1949, ending the brief life of a locomotive too grand for the railroad that built it. Number 6. Union Pacific gas turbine electric locomotives. From 1952 to 1961, Union Pacific operated the most powerful locomotives ever built in America. The third-generation gas turbine electrics produced 8,500 horsepower, more than 4 times the output of contemporary diesels. They were essentially jet engines on rails, earning the nickname Big Blows for their deafening exhaust noise. The turbines burned Bunker C heavy fuel oil, a thick black residual sludge that was cheaper than diesel in the 1950s. At peak utilization, the turbines hauled over 10% of Union Pacific's freight across the western deserts. But these locomotives had problems that proved fatal. The sound was so loud that California banned them from populated areas. The heat was intense enough to cook birds that flew too close, and reportedly softened asphalt on railroad bridges. Bunker C fuel had to be preheated just to flow through the system. They consumed roughly twice as much fuel as equivalent diesels, a problem masked only by cheap fuel prices. When the plastics industry discovered uses for heavy fuel oil, prices rose dramatically. On December 26, 1969, the last operational run took place. All 55 locomotives were retired by 1970. Only 2 survive in museums today, monuments to an era when raw power mattered more than efficiency. Number 5. New York City steam ban of 1903 and 1923. On January 8, 1902, a horrific accident in the Park Avenue Tunnel killed 15 people when a New York Central train missed signals obscured by smoke and slammed into a stopped commuter train. The tragedy triggered legislation that would reshape American railroads. In 1903, New York State banned steam locomotives from Manhattan south of the Harlem River, giving railroads 5 years to comply. This single law forced the construction of Grand Central Terminal's underground network and pioneered mainline electrification. But the 1923 Kaufman Act went further. Assemblyman Victor Kaufman pushed through legislation banning steam locomotives from all of New York City by January 1926. The law imposed fines of $5,000 per day per violation, devastating sums designed to force compliance. Railroads scrambled for alternatives. Some electrified rapidly. Others could not afford the expense and turned to an emerging technology: diesel locomotives. The Baltimore and Ohio purchased their first diesel specifically to comply with the Kaufman Act. The law was eventually ruled unconstitutional in 1926, but its impact was permanent. The Kaufman Act created the first commercial market for diesel locomotives in North America, accelerating a transition that would ultimately doom steam everywhere. Number 4. The Chesapeake and Ohio T1 boiler explosion. On May 12, 1948, Chesapeake and Ohio T1 number 3020 was hauling freight near Chillicothe, Ohio, when catastrophe struck. The locomotive's firemen noticed the water level dropping dangerously low, but before corrective action could be taken, the firebox crown sheet overheated. When cooler water from the tender injection system contacted the weakened metal, it flashed instantly into massive steam pressure. The boiler exploded with devastating force. Engineer W.R. Terry, fireman T.R. Lauder, and front brakeman W.C. Bush were all killed. The locomotive was blown to pieces, a tangled mess of pipes and steel scattered across the right-of-way. Townspeople rushed to help, but nothing could be done for the crew. Boiler explosions had plagued steam railroading since its earliest days, but the Chillicothe disaster came at a crucial moment in history. Steam technology was already losing ground to diesel. The explosive violence of this failure reinforced every argument against continued steam operation. Wikipedia records 53 major boiler explosions in locomotive history, claiming 155 lives. The Chillicothe explosion was not the deadliest, but it became symbolic. No diesel locomotive ever failed like this. The Chesapeake and Ohio retired all T1 locomotives between 1952 and 1953, their reputation irreparably damaged. Number 3. Southern Pacific AC-12 cab-forward locomotives. Southern Pacific's cab-forward locomotives were not banned exactly. They were so uniquely suited to one railroad's circumstances that they became impossible anywhere else. Unique design and purpose kept them confined to a single company. Between 1909 and 1944, Southern Pacific operated 256 cab-forwards, the largest fleet of this unusual design ever assembled. The reason was geography. Sierra Nevada tunnels and snowsheds trapped exhaust smoke so badly that crews in conventional locomotives risked asphyxiation. By putting the cab at the front and the tender at the rear, exhaust stayed behind the engineer even in the longest tunnels. This was only possible because cab forwards burned oil. Liquid fuel could be piped from the tender to the firebox through articulated connections. The AC-12 class, built during World War II, represented the design's peak. 12 were constructed, hauling 7,000-ton trains over Donner Pass with remarkable efficiency. But when diesel locomotives arrived, they solved the tunnel smoke problem without requiring specialized infrastructure. Oil-burning cab forwards needed different servicing facilities than any other railroad possessed. Their articulated fuel lines leaked. The complexity made them expensive to maintain, and no other railroad would buy them used. The last cab forwards were retired in 1956, and the entire fleet was scrapped without preservation. Number 2. Union Pacific Coal Turbine 8080. In 1962, Union Pacific decided that if burning heavy oil worked for gas turbines, maybe burning pulverized coal would work even better. The railroad cobbled together locomotive number 80, later renumbered 8080, from parts of retired equipment. The cab unit came from an Alco PA1 diesel. The power unit was a modified Great Northern WW1 electric locomotive. The turbine was borrowed from an earlier oil-burning GTEL. The coal tender was rebuilt from a 4664 Challenger. The result was the longest locomotive ever constructed at 226 feet from end to end, at 7,000 horsepower. It was also one of the most ambitious experiments in railroad history. It was a complete disaster. Pulverizing coal fine enough to burn efficiently without destroying turbine blades proved nearly impossible. Ash and unburned particles eroded the turbine at catastrophic rates. The complexity of grinding machinery added another failure point to an already temperamental system. The coal turbine was a last desperate gamble to keep Union Pacific's locomotives coal-fired in an era when oil prices were rising. But the technical challenges proved insurmountable. By 1968, number 8080 was retired, its short career having proved that not every energy source belongs in a turbine. Union Pacific never attempted coal-fired motive power again. Number 1. Union Pacific M. 10002 steam turbine electric. Before Union Pacific's famous gas turbines, there was an earlier, forgotten experiment. In 1939, the railroad took delivery of 2 steam turbine electric locomotives from General Electric and Alco. They looked like enormous Art Deco streamlined passenger units, but inside lurked revolutionary technology. These were not steam turbines driving wheels directly. They used steam to spin turbines that generated electricity for traction motors, exactly like the later Chesapeake and Ohio M1. General Electric classified them as producing 2,500 horsepower each. They were tested on the New York Central before arriving at Union Pacific for publicity tours and brief passenger service. The locomotives proved hopelessly unreliable. After just 6 months of operational use, both were returned to General Electric. They sat in storage until 1943, when wartime material shortages led to their scrapping. The experiment was quietly buried, so thoroughly forgotten that Union Pacific's later gas turbine program is often described as their first turbine venture. It was not. These steam turbine electric locomotives represented the first major American attempt at turbine-powered railroading. Their failure cost Union Pacific 6 years of development. When gas turbines succeeded in the 1950s, nobody mentioned the 1939 disaster. And that's all, folks. These 15 locomotives prove that sometimes the most ambitious engineering creates the most spectacular failures. If you enjoyed this countdown through railroad history's forbidden machines, hit subscribe for more tales of locomotives that changed everything and locomotives that changed nothing. Here is another video I have specially selected for you. See you next time.